Welcome to Arbitrary and Capricious, a podcast where we talk about the shit that we want to talk about. We are your host, Aaron.
And I'm Jay.
And it's time to get arbitrary. Now, it's been a few weeks since we've actually had a podcast. I was actually out of town in Philadelphia, had a big trial, and I am back and ready to talk about the news and everything that's been happening. Jay, how have you been these 2 weeks?
I've been all right. I moved into a new studio space, and I'm still kind of trying to figure all that out and assembling furniture, but it's been good. It's been good. I'm glad to be back on the pod.
Yeah, IKEA keeping you busy?
Yeah, a little bit. Those little androgynous figures showing you what to do.
The Swedes. It's the Swedes, right?
Yeah, they're Swedish.
Okay. IKEA is fun to go and look at. I don't know. They have decent food too for, a furniture store.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know if you've ever gone with a significant other, but it's kind of a cliche that if you do, you're guaranteed to have a fight. And I've definitely experienced that myself.
I went with my first girlfriend to IKEA because I was looking for something specific. We didn't have a fight, but I also don't remember us liking anything there. So maybe it was just kind of we joined in the dislike of the IKEA furniture and just left.
Yeah, that could be it.
So, well, let's get going. Before we start the news we want to talk about this week, let's talk about old news. Jay, I know that we've talked a lot about the union strikes, the teacher strikes going on in America, ongoing here in America. And I read recently that the Teamsters, which is one of the biggest unions in America, are now talking strike with regards to UPS. So that could be a huge disruption for commerce here in America if that actually goes through. So I think that we could see some pretty exciting union throwdowns. And that's what I was saying just a couple weeks ago. I feel like it's time for a resurgence of unions in America due to just how much power has consolidated in the corporate hands.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And to just to clarify, when you say the Teamsters, can you explain a little bit about who those are?
So Teamsters, if you go back in time, one of the things they're really famous about was Jimmy Hoffa was the leader of the Teamsters when he disappeared. Have some ties to the mobs from that time period, but it's a big union that represents a bunch of different industries across the United States. But I think one of their biggest ones is UPS. The Teamsters represent the workers that work at UPS, and whenever there are negotiations for the labor contract, the Teamsters negotiates on behalf of all the employees across the United States. Whether you're in a right-to-work state or a union state, it doesn't matter. You get the benefit of the Teamsters representation. So they're now talking strike. So if all the Teamsters across the board go on strike, it cripples UPS, and they're not going to be able to meet their pretty heavy burden of getting everything delivered on time. I know that just here in Dallas, they're struggling to keep drivers just because of how much stuff has got to be delivered on time and how hard these routes are. So if you take away all of their workers, UPS is going to be in a bad way very quickly.
Yeah, and isn't that how everything on Amazon gets delivered? I guess not everything, but
not everything. Amazon does have its own delivery system, but it's apparently even worse. It's terrible. But UPS really doesn't like the Amazon contract because Amazon ships too much stuff.
Yeah.
It's really put it's definitely weighed down their actual system. It's definitely become a cog, something blocking the machine from working properly because they weren't ready for how much Americans are buying. Just through Amazon.
Right. So this proposed strike, it's still just in the planning stages, correct?
I think it's in the rumor stages, more or less.
Oh, okay.
But I have family that works for UPS, and I just kind of said, "Hey, what have you heard?" He's like, "Oh yeah, that's definitely being talked about among the workers."
Interesting. Okay.
So it's at least it's a big enough rumor to be that the UPSers and the Teamsters are talking about it at the ground level.
Okay. Well, have you heard anything about a similar situation that's been going on in Brazil recently?
I have not, but you are our South American corruption man, so what's going on?
Bum, 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 bum. Well, there's been a trucker strike in Brazil over the last couple of months. It's recently come to an end only through the intervention of, or actually the threat of military intervention. Basically, what these truck drivers did is they, number one, they went on strike, but number two, they just left their rigs out blocking the roads so that nobody else could get around either. And what they were protesting was that the state oil company Petrobras had increased diesel prices because those prices are in Brazil, they're set by the state oil company. Essentially, they're set by the government. And in response to increased worldwide oil prices, they increased the price of diesel that they were selling to the consumers. And so that's the reason why they went on strike. And what the strikers were saying is that, yeah, we understand that there are market forces at play here. So, yeah, we get it that you might have to increase the prices. However, this Lava Jato corruption scandal that we've been talking about for so long was run primarily through Petrobras. So basically they're saying, yeah, you know what, maybe the price of oil is going up, but also you steal from us all the time. So why should we trust you?
That's a good point.
They've got a pretty good point there. But this strike, it started to affect the common people, as you were kind of describing about how if UPS stops delivering, then a lot of commerce is going to stop. Well, there were reports of bare store shelves all across Brazil because things weren't being delivered by the trucks who were on strike. And usually what you would expect is that the consumers who aren't able to get the stuff that we're used to, they're going to be the ones who put pressure on the truckers to end the strike because, you know, we need our stuff. But from what I was reading, public opinion remained behind the truckers.
Corruption's you can't come back from corruption, or at least you would hope you can't come back from corruption. But I feel like I'm glad that happened because the way the story started, it kind of sounded like the truckers were the dicks in the situation. But I think that's a perfectly effective use of protest. I've said this all, whenever like the kneeling started in the NFL, like protests are supposed to. My dog is now barking. Sorry. Protests are supposed to interfere with the way our daily lives operate. It's not supposed to necessarily be violent, but to at least make us uncomfortable, to knock us out of our routine, to make us look at the situation, pop that bubble of, first world problems that we have, and make us see something beyond ourselves. That's what a protest is supposed to do. These truckers blocking the roads, shutting down commerce, making it to where it was uncomfortable for the average man, that they now have a vested interest in the protest.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're going to be the strongest power to lean on the government.
Mm-hmm.
Now, did the government bend, or did they just say, we're going to shoot you guys if you don't stop this?
They did make some concessions. They agreed to freeze diesel prices for 60 days. They also agreed to set the price once a month rather than once a day. There were some concessions, but long term, the government still has the ability to raise the price if they need or want to. However, Brazil is going to be electing a president later this year. So this, some people are saying, is kind of a foreshadowing to the election about how you respond to this is really going to be judged by the voters. So we'll see what happens.
Well, we'll see if one of their parties down there latches onto that. Is there like an opposition party that's pretty big down there? Like, I don't know. Are they more like Europe, where it's a bunch of different factions like banding together and creating coalitions, or do they have political parties like us?
Yeah, they're a little bit more European. This is where we've got Lula, the ex-president who's in jail but is still running for president.
Yeah, I remember that.
So they're saying he's probably not going to, we're expecting that the electoral court is not going to allow him to run. And he is leading in the polls. And if we throw him out, the next up is a guy, I can't remember his name, but he's the crazy evangelical who said that, if you have a gay son, you just need to punch him harder.
That's terrible.
Yeah, it is pretty terrible. So not a lot of optimism for Brazil at the moment.
I do want to say one more thing that's not optimistic about Brazil. I just remembered that I read an article this week that pointed out that Brazil was one of the first countries in the New World to abolish slavery, and I think like 161 years ago, and it was recently discovered that some corporations operating down in the rainforest and in like a lot of the agriculture are actually using forms of slavery to harvest stuff down there, like paying people penance, like $500 for 3 weeks of work for an entire family working. And this is like whatever the Brazilian dollar is. It's nothing. And that was recently discovered and the government's investigating and stuff. But that's pretty rough. Like that we've gotten back to this place where, people are relying on slavery to try and maximize profits.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That is abhorrent.
Abhorrent.
But I think that also goes on everywhere. Sex slaves here in America that are trafficked in from all over the world.
No, absolutely.
They busted a ring in Plano like a year and a half ago. Plano.
Yeah. No, there was something down in Arizona just recently discovered, like on the border. So
you know what? Somebody told me that the Vegas buffet in Waco. Do you remember that place?
No.
Oh, it was a knockoff Chuck E. Cheese, and then it closed and reopened as of supposedly a Vegas style buffet. But they were busted for human trafficking recently.
Oh man.
Yeah. I mean, it's not even like a nice place. It's like a crappy.
Well, you figure that your human trafficking takes place at pretty seedy establishments.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I'm not assuming that P.F. Chang's has a bunch of slaves back in the kitchen.
Yeah, the rip-off Chuck E. Cheese is probably ripe for human trafficking.
Good point. Well, that took a dark turn. So what other old news do we have?
Well, as a subset of the old news segment, I have created what I call the Trumpdate. And it's just kind of like a quick bullet point, very sad narration of recent events involving Trumper's administration in the world. And so number one on the Trump date is Session and the pre-existing conditions. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced that the Department of Justice would no longer defend key portions of the Affordable Care Act, which is Obamacare, regarding pre-existing conditions. The Attorney General has determined that it is unconstitutional. My first urge whenever I heard this story was to be like, bullshit. You don't get to make that decision. The Supreme Court does. And then instantly I was taken back to DOMA. If you remember back under the Obama administration, the Defense of Marriage Act was a question that was on its way up to the Supreme Court. Halfway up at the appellate stages, Obama had the Department of Justice stop defending the Defense of Marriage Act, saying, we have determined it is unconstitutional. The liberals cheered, the Republicans sneered, and ultimately, Speaker of the House, John Boehner, I think, had taxpayer money spent to continue the case all the way to the Supreme Court, where the decision was had and struck down. So it was unconstitutional. But it raises a question. How can you, the executive branch, faithfully execute the laws of the land and let the Supreme Court make its determination whether or not something is constitutional, as is their job, if you do not actually pursue it all the way to the end? Should the executive branch be allowed to do this?
Well, maybe I'm conflating two concepts, but doesn't this get into the realm of essentially prosecutorial discretion?
No.
What laws does the executive enforce and what does it not?
No, I think that executive privilege or prosecutorial discretion comes more in the individual determination, such as, hey, Jimmy, you work for the mob. We caught you, money laundering. If you'll testify to basically all the terrible things that your boss has done, we will give you immunity. We won't prosecute you for your crimes. That is an example of prosecutorial discretion. Looking at a law and saying, hey, our politics doesn't like this law, so we're not going to enforce it, that runs into a problem with whether or not you are faithfully upholding the laws of the land. The court should be the ultimate arbiter of that decision, or Congress should repeal or replace the law. The
Okay.
executive branch should not have a determination of whether or not they're going to actually enforce a law.
Now, I really don't mean to be defending Sessions in any way,
No, I
because
mean, I brought up
I
the
can't stand that guy. But let me give you a counterexample. What about the Obama era policy that, to my knowledge, has continued under the Trump administration, that the feds are not enforcing marijuana prohibition in states that have legalized it?
Well, as I have said since the beginning of this technically violates the Constitution. The U.S. Supremacy Clause mandates that when there's a conflict between state law and federal law, that federal law wins. We have a conflict. The Controlled Substance Act was upheld as constitutional. The Necessary and Proper Clause and the Supremacy Clause attached to the Controlled Substance Act trumps any state law. All that really happened when these states legalized marijuana was they didn't have to enforce marijuana laws anymore. It did not create a market for it. It was a fiction created by Obama. Now, if you notice what has happened, as Sessions has announced that he's going to enforce the laws, remember, now we have uncertainty because there's an administration change. Congress is now scrambling to create laws to address the situation. And what are they doing? There's the law that's going forward that's actually probably going to get voted on, that's being put forward by Elizabeth Warren and Cory Gardner, which is the Colorado senator, basically says in states where it's been legalized by the states, you no longer have the authority to enforce the federal marijuana laws. That would fix the conflict. Okay? It would basically mean that if the state agrees with us, the feds have authority to enforce federal law here. If the states don't agree with us, we lose that authority.
It's sure, but as it stands now,
it's not proper.
Marijuana continues to be illegal nationwide under federal law, correct?
Yes.
So I guess in your argument that therefore the executive should be faithfully upholding the laws, should the DEA be raiding marijuana shops in Colorado and California?
If it would, yes, it should, because it would probably be the thing that lit up Congress to actually change the laws.
Well, okay, that took a turn. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that I want marijuana people to be arrested. I don't want dispensaries to be arrested. But let's be honest for a second. If we're talking about, like, in a vacuum, the theory of our government, there is nothing in the Constitution that allows the executive branch to make a determination that an entire statutory regulatory scheme is not going to be enforced. Okay? Does the new administration get to basically not appoint anyone to the EPA so that there are no regulators to regulate, even though the laws are on the books and the people have wanted them enforced? Is that the way the government gets to work? Are we going to allow the people in this country that want to dismantle the federal government by just making it inept? Are we going to let them do that? I don't think that that's okay. If the executive branch is supposed to do something faithfully, then I think they need to do it faithfully. And if that means that you don't like the laws that they're enforcing, vote for your congressman and tell them that. That's the whole theory of our government. We are the government. If you don't like the laws, tell your congressman.
So I guess are you saying that they can do this, but they shouldn't be doing this?
I don't think that they can do this. I think the Constitution is clear.
Okay.
I think that prosecutorial discretion comes in only the individual cases. Okay? It comes to how you try the case, how you try a interconnected case, not am I going to enforce this law or not. Now, we have a lot of old laws on the books that we don't enforce. We should remove those. Okay? That's just Congress being lazy. But if the Constitution says that you have a duty to faithfully execute the laws of the land and uphold them, upholding means defending them all the way to the end of the Supreme Court. Wouldn't you agree?
No, I think I'm going to disagree with you on this one.
Okay. You don't agree that faithfully execute and uphold the laws of the land is to defend it all the way to the Supreme Court. That's not a duty of the executive branch.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Because I think that the executive branch's ability to just refuse to enforce the law is one of the checks and balances that's built into our system.
But where is that built in?
in the fact that they can be inactive, they can refuse to enforce. And if we, the people, don't like that, well, in 4 years, we can elect a new executive who will.
I mean, I think that nullifies faithfully uphold and execute the laws of the land from the Constitution. So an implicit interpretation has eliminated an explicit command.
Well, I mean, that's the first time that's ever happened, right?
I mean, I don't know. Can you give me an example?
No, I can't. I don't know, like the whole right to privacy penumbra shit. Like,
well, that's a little different. But well, okay. Let me just say this. I think that for me, I would want the government to protect our environment, regardless of who is in power, if the laws stay that way. Okay, when we have bad laws, the Supreme Court can strike them down for violating the Constitution, or Congress can repeal them if they are unpopular. Congress is the one who creates and removes laws based off the will of the people. The executive branch is supposed to execute the laws because the laws are, under the legal fiction, seen as the will of the people. The will of the people is not what the media says, what polls say, what people are saying to the executive branch. It's what the laws that are ultimately created, because it's a majority of the House of Representatives and it's a majority of the Senate. Okay? So at this point, if we allow the executive branch to choose which laws they're going to enforce, we're breaking the legal fiction of the government, which is created by the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary, in my opinion. Okay. That'll be the end of my analysis.
You know, and I think I might have backed myself into a corner here, because I'm usually the guy like standing on the street corner shouting, "Rules matter!" You know, and one of the big problems with the Trump administration is that they are working to erode the rules-based international order that has benefited the United States for so long. So then for me to come back and say, well, it's okay for them to just not enforce stuff, well, that might be a little bit hypocritical.
No, I mean, I think that I would be hypocritical to not say that I agreed with not defending DOMA. That's why I brought it up. I wanted to point out my own hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. But now looking at the situation, I'm like, okay, let's be real. We don't want the administrations to be able to pick and choose which laws they can enforce, because what happens whenever they don't enforce civil rights laws and it matters, you know, and people are discriminated against on voting, and they stay in power for another 8 years because they're tampering with the system. I don't want the executive branch to have that power. There has to be that they're confined by the laws that are given to them to execute. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see that. I guess in like what I'm arguing for would create a situation where a court makes a judgment, then you go to the sheriff to have that judgment served, and the sheriff is just like, get out of my face.
Well, the sheriff's like, well, I like Billy. I don't think I'm going to do that.
And the entire system just breaks down. So
exactly.
Yeah.
So
I've talked myself in a circle.
Well, anyway, so let's continue on. Just a few more points. Giuliani and what I call the porn star defense. Over this last weekend, I believe Giuliani said on the morning shows that he had no respect for people who are in porn movies. And I thought this was hilarious because immediately I was reminded of the salacious pictures from Melania Trump that came out during the campaign of her doing nude photos. And then someone pointed out online that Trump has been in numerous softcore porn movies.
Yeah.
And so to me, that is the funniest, because it's like they don't even give a shit about the truth anymore or history or reality. Like they're just...
To be clear, Trump is not a
actor like doing things, but he's in the movies.
He's got a cameo.
That's true, but still, it's making money off of the.
But still, absolutely, saying that a person is not deserving of respect for the reasons that Giuliani said, which were, I think he said, sex workers or people who sell their bodies. Mm-hmm. That's not a reason to disrespect people. Like, no. There are very, very few reasons to disrespect people, and what they do for work is not one of them.
I think that being an asshole and like mischaracterizing people is a reason to disrespect people and just not consider what they say. So people of the world, disrespect and disregard everything that comes out of Giuliani's mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. That we can just forget about that guy.
So moving on, Trump at the G7. This kind of ties in with the Trump and the terrible tariffs. As you know, Trump has passed some tariffs on our allies, which is great.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up.
And I just want to bring up this one story on that is that he apparently, when confronted by Trudeau about the tariffs, Trump accused Canada of burning down the White House in 1812, which, oh my God, what a moron. But like, Canada's too fucking nice. Like, why are we picking a fight with Canada? And why are we sucking up to Russia? This is like Bizarro world. I mean, yeah. I saw like 2 days ago was the anniversary of whenever we put the Rosensteins to death for conspiring with the Russians, 68 years ago. It's what has happened to America?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. Especially in regards to these tariffs. I think the last time that we talked about them, I had given the Trump administration some credit, saying that he had announced the tariffs, then announced exemptions from those tariffs for our allies. And I said, hey, maybe he's not such an idiot. Well, no, he is an idiot because they canceled that exemption and have slapped those tariffs, causing Mexico to put retaliatory tariffs on bourbon and pork. I've heard that I want to say Canada is targeting like California and I can't remember what. But anyway, we're alienating our allies, and that is the last thing we need to be doing.
Then
you need friends. You always need friends.
You always need friends. And then Doofus goes to the G7 and suggests that Russia needs to be readmitted. Oh my God. Can it be any more blatant at this point? My brain is melting, Jay. My brain is melting. Like, it's almost overt. It's like they're flaunting it. What has Russia done for us lately? Like, we now know what they've done for the Trump administration, but what have they done for the United States? Why should we do anything with them?
That's a great question.
We're screwing our allies and we're sucking up to our enemies. It's weird. It's fucking weird.
In the 2012 election, Mitt Romney was just castrated by the media for saying that the biggest foreign ally to the United States was Russia. Everybody laughed at him. We're not laughing anymore.
I think they say enemy, not ally.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
I got that backwards.
I remember that. Well, that's the Trumpdate as it stands. Do you have anything to add to it before we? Well,
I think we need to acknowledge that the Trump-Kim summit is tomorrow, which in Singapore is going to be like 5 hours from now.
Oh wow!
So that's coming up.
We should. Oh man, it'd be fun to live cast that.
Yeah, I it's not like they're gonna stream it on CNN. Like, I think I read that they're not even gonna have aides in the room.
Wow. Well, I heard that Singapore has been really cracking down, making sure everything's super pristine for Trump and Kim coming into the country.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're pretty much always on crackdown. Like, there is no assembly. Like, I think if there's more than 6 people, the police come and bust you up
with bats.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. It wouldn't surprise me. But one of the interesting stories I saw regarding the summit is that they're having the summits on an island that is still part of Singapore, because Singapore is an island to begin with. And the name of the island means peace, and apparently, especially South Koreans are pointing to this as being a sign that good things are going to happen. This is all preordained. We are going to have peace. Well, it's only had that name since 1976, when the name before that was Death Island from Strangers or something crazy like that.
Death Island from Strangers. That sounds really apropos.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens. I know you're pretty optimistic. I gotta say, I really can't see this going well. But
if the South Koreans keep feeding the egos in the room and manipulate them into peace, I'm gonna count it as a win.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Peace is a win.
Peace is a win.
I think we can all agree on that.
All right, so that is the end of the Trump date for this week. So now let's move on, Jay. I think we were going south of the border once again.
Yeah, well, I've got a couple of little stories that I want to touch on quickly that I think they're interesting and deserve a little bit of talk. And then I want to finish up with talking about the biggest event in the world starting on Thursday, the FIFA World Cup.
Yes.
So to start off with, I want to talk about the political crisis in Spain. So I wouldn't necessarily say south of the border unless we were in France. However, I wouldn't mind being in France.
Yeah, I will say this. I just read this. Just a quick sidebar. Apparently, it's San Antonio's tricentennial, a celebration of their establishment as a city, and the Queen of Spain is coming.
Cool.
To America, and I was like, oh, they still have a queen?
Yeah. Yes, they do. I don't know her name. I know the king is Felipe.
Felipe. They're always named Felipe, aren't they?
Well, he's like Felipe, the 16th.
Okay.
But his father was Juan Carlos.
Oh.
Well, anyway, I want to talk about the civilian government of Spain.
Okay.
Which they are, they do have a king and queen, but it's like England where they don't actually do anything real to the government. Exactly. So the Prime Minister of Spain was ousted through a censure motion, a vote of no confidence. Basically, Parliament, if they get together and more than 50% vote to remove the Prime Minister, then he's out. And this happened because there was some old corruption allegations against not necessarily the Prime Minister himself, but his party in general, that date back to the financial crisis, basically just good old corruption, politicians getting kickbacks from construction companies and such. And what triggered this vote in particular was there was a conviction of a particularly high-level politician. And how it works in Spain is that if you're going to do a vote of no confidence, you have to provide an alternative. Basically, you have to nominate who's going to replace him. And you have to get 50% of parliament behind that individual to be the new prime minister. And that's what happened here, where we've actually got a strange situation where the prime minister himself is not a member of parliament, and his party only controls about 28% of the seats in the parliament.
That's interesting.
So he's leading the government. His party is ostensibly part of the ruling coalition. However, they're really only a sliver of the legislature.
So it's interesting. Is that kind of like a negotiating thing? Like they really need this small faction, so they're like, "We'll let you be the prime minister," or did that just kind of like happen by accident?
It was a little bit that the new prime minister is he's the leader of the next biggest party after the one that was just removed.
Okay.
So the Spanish political spectrum is pretty fractured right now because they've got their standard right and left parties, your Democrats, your Republicans. But since the financial crisis, there's these two upstart parties that have really gained traction. One called Podemos is a leftist populist outfit, calling for, let's jail all the bankers and, feel the burn and all that.
Eat the rich.
Yeah, very much so. Anti-austerity. Then there's another one that it's difficult to define other than just sort of centrist. They're called Ciudadanos, which I'm probably mispronouncing that, but it translates to citizens. So it's basically just people fed up with everybody else and looking for a solution. And so I believe that this new the old coalition was the more conservative party, the Partido Popular, the PP, or Pepe as they call them, like Pepe Le Pew.
It just really seems like a terrible nickname, almost as bad as the donkey for the Democrats.
Oh yeah, well, I mean I guess they don't, they don't get the joke. But so the Conservative Party's out. The more liberal one is in. They're actually the Socialist Party. And I believe that they have been able to get this coalition by appealing to both of those upstart parties, both Podemos and Ciudadanos. And interestingly enough, this really doesn't have anything to do with the crisis in Catalonia, with the area where Barcelona is declaring independence and all that.
Yeah, how'd that resolve? They just arrested everybody and everything went back to normal?
Well, the I guess what you could call the federal government, the national government of Spain, imposed direct rule on Catalonia, basically taking away the state level power temporarily until they could call fresh elections. That happened. And actually only, I think, 2 weeks ago, did they turn control back over to the state government. And basically both sides have kind of backed off and agreed to negotiate a little bit more, because the different, I've been referring to them as states, but in the technical term for them in Spain is actually autonomous communities. But they're essentially analogous to U.S. states in that they have some autonomy, but the level of autonomy amongst those different autonomous communities varies greatly. Where the Basque Country has the most autonomy, probably then followed by Catalonia, the ones who are trying to break away, and then the rest are all just sort of in line with the national government.
That's interesting.
So, yeah, it's pretty much anywhere you go in the world. When you start to look closer, everything is really regional. It's people, especially here in Texas, we love to act like, well, I'm a Texan first and I'm an American second, and I'm the only kind of person in the world who thinks like that. No, you're not. Everybody's like that.
Yeah. I mean, even like if you read back into the Civil War era, General Lee was like, I'm a Virginian and I'm going to defend Virginia, even if it's from the United States. That mindset kind of changed post, Civil War for a lot of U.S. citizens, but I'm sure
World War II also played a big factor in nationalism, patriotism.
Yeah, absolutely. That the propaganda by the U.S. government during that time, it was all about being proud of being American.
Yeah. Well, now that we've brought it back to the New World, I also wanted to go to Nicaragua.
Yeah.
This is a Central American country that has been through a lot. This was where they've been having some political unrest recently. People have been protesting against their president and dictator, Daniel Ortega. This started out I think it was about 2 months ago. People started protesting after the government announced decreases in pensions and I believe salaries for public workers. And the response from the people was, well, you're corrupt as hell and you've stolen all our money. You robbed the pension fund. That's why there's no money left. And now you're cutting the pensions. So people started to protest, and, to this corrupt dictator's credit, he backed off and he canceled those restrictions on the pensions. But the protest had gained enough critical mass that it's still going. And there's been a massive crackdown from the security forces. Last time I looked, something like 127 people have been killed by the security forces in protests.
That's not okay.
There was reports of the people being fired on by military helicopters. There's actually a big element of pro-government militias. Basically soldiers who are off the books, that can be called on by the government to beat up, kill their opponents, whoever they feel like. And there's been a big involvement with that here. One human rights group has alleged that government planes were spraying fertilizer. I'm sorry, not fertilizer, but insecticide onto the crowds of protesters. And that's being investigated by the United Nations at this point. So it's a mess. It's a big problem.
I feel like sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I feel like as Americans, whenever protests are reacted to violently by the government, we take an additional kind of hey, that's not okay, because that's a part of the first. and I think we should feel that way whenever like someone reacts violently to a protest. That this is something that needs to happen around the world. Even if you don't agree with the protest, you should agree with their right to, because sometimes things need to be talked about, like we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. And we made reference to how there's no freedom of assembly in Singapore. These are fundamental rights, because without them, you get Syria before the war. You get life under Saddam. You get a current day Iran. People are not able to voice their opinions without fear of a knock on the door from a government thug. And this is real. This happens.
Yeah. And this is not theory. This is not, hyperbole. This happens.
And to the situation in Nicaragua, it's getting better. From last I heard, the president actually agreed to negotiations and talks with some of the leadership of the protests. So they're negotiating on a new election, and basically what the experts are saying is that the protesters are not going to accept a situation where the president stays. But when you're a dictator and you have the government and the security forces doing your bidding, that's how you stay in power in the first place.
So, hard to give that up.
Yeah, and most people think that what he's probably going to do is say, you know what, protesters, fair enough, I'll step down. I've had my day in the sun, and it's now time for my vice president to take over and run the country. Well, you want to know who the vice president is?
His brother?
It's his wife. Yeah. I know this is very, very reductive, but whenever you start electing family members or especially spouses, that just smacks of corruption. And that's in this past election, I didn't like Hillary Clinton for a lot of reasons, but I also just didn't like voting for the spouse of a former president. That just didn't seem right.
Yeah. Well, I still think she would have been better than this orange miss.
Oh, son of a bitch. I just admitted to voting for him. Edit that out.
No, it's live.
God damn it. Oh, well, anyway, so let's hope for a peaceful and democratic solution in Nicaragua. And I wish that we had a State Department that was a number one.
Not shady shit.
Yeah, that actually did something that was competent, and we could maybe be involved in brokering a peace deal. But there's absolutely no hope of that.
Well, and also South America, Nicaragua, that's not sexy. That's not going to get any ratings. He's not going to let Pompeo go down there and invest time in that. What's sexy? Iran, Syria, Korea, screwing with democracies around the world, sucking up to Russia. It's a TV show, man. It's a fucking TV show.
You're absolutely right. And while we're still talking about corruption and Latin American corruption, I actually want to take a moment and check the mailbag because we had a viewer question on this very topic. So we got a question from Frank in Philadelphia.
Well, hi, Frank.
Hey, Frank. He says, hi, guys. Love the pod. Jay, I've noticed you like to harp on corruption. I'm a big fan of corruption, and I find this offensive. However, you only seem to complain about corruption abroad. What gives? America is as corrupt as anywhere else. Well, Frank, you're not wrong.
Frank sounds proud of how corrupt America is.
Well, he did run a sweatshop in Vietnam for quite a few years.
That's off the record, though.
Yes.
Oh gosh, love all.
He mentioned that in his email to us today.
That's a great reference since I just came back from Philly. For those of you who don't know, Frank is
Hey, Frank's a real listener, man.
No. I'm sorry. Frank is a character from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. But that is so great that's a great tie-in. But
to address your question, Frank,
what gives, Jay? Why don't you bash on American corruption? Is it not good enough for you?
You know what? You're absolutely right, and maybe it's for the reason that that Aaron was just talking about. With it's not sexy, it doesn't get ratings. It's when we go to Corruption Corner, and I can say corruption in Colombia. That sounds a little bit better than, an alderman in rural Pennsylvania has been stealing cash from the pension fund. Or, Trump is robbing us blind.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's also, I think, a little bit of cognitive dissonance. Neither of us want to admit that that's probably what's happening, that the IRS coffers are being slowly poured into offshore bank accounts for the Trump administration. Oh. No one wants to think about that.
I'm looking at you, Mnuchin.
Oh, my God, Mnuchin.
Because he's Secretary of the Treasury, right?
Yeah. And gosh. I think what's crazy is he even begged Trump not to let the tariffs go against Canada. And he was unsuccessful. Oh. Like, he begged him. Who is whispering in his ear this it has to be the Russians. I'm sorry. Get your tinfoil hat on. I think it's time for just a little segue into Conspiracy Corner for this. Because how can it be anything other than Russia? How if Steve Mnuchin, the head of the Treasury, is begging him not to screw Canada with these tariffs, who in the administration is saying, yeah, do it, stick it to them? Canada has had it too easy, too long up there, and we're not buying any more damn maple syrup from them. Like, who is saying this to Trump? It can't be anyone but Russia. I mean, out comes Razor.
Well, yes. But no. What about Trump's base? What about the people who long for the return of the steel mills and the coal mines? Isn't that what this is for?
Is it? I mean, how many?
It's to protect the American steel industry.
But okay, number one, that's like one state, and I don't think that one state got even elected. It's like Pennsylvania. I don't get this. I don't get this because even if you are one of those 12 workers, like, what about everyone else that supports them? They're not working for the steel mill. There's not that many people working for the coal industry. Like who is it that works at McDonald's that's saying, yeah, we got to fight for the steel mill worker?
I think there's a lot of people out there. I think that's the reason why Trump that's the reason why Trump won, is that he connected with a lot of people on an emotional level. And I don't mean to say that any of this makes rational sense, because you're right. The actual number of people working in the steel or the coal industries is very, very small. However, people, they have this nostalgia. I think it's called revanchism, that they want to make America great again. That's classic revanchism. They want to reclaim what they feel they've lost. And I think they see this as a way of doing that. And as we've discussed at length on this podcast, this is not the way to do that. But
fair point. I think that the revanchism probably applies more to Trump's overall message, not so much to the steel tariffs. And I don't think it applies to screwing with our allies, because the 1950s, the height of American culture, the height of American dominance, like, we're friends with everybody. That's the thing that doesn't make sense. Is, okay, you want to make America great? We were a world leader. We were an innovator. We invested in shit. We rebuilt countries that we blew up, and we made friends with our enemies. And, okay, maybe that's what you're trying to do with Russia, but by pissing off everyone else on Earth, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Why he's targeting our allies, I can't say why that fits in with the narrative. I don't know.
Everyone who's been a Russia watcher for the last 20, 30 years says that Putin's number one goal is to dismantle NATO. And Trump is just handing it to him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I don't understand. You want to be a military superpower, but you're dismantling our network. How does that benefit anybody? Well, those damn European elites. God, stupid people, don't vote, please.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know.
I one time heard on a radio station, I know we'll get back to FIFA in a second. One time I heard on a radio station, I was like 17, 18 years old, right? Whenever I was about to vote for the first time. Some like morning show guys, and they were old, super conservative Republican guys, and they were like, "Hey, young people, y'all don't know how the world works, so y'all don't need to vote. Just don't vote so the conservatives can win." And I was just absolutely offended by this statement. I was just like, "Oh, how dare they say that?" And I'm sitting here, 15 years down the road, and I'm like, "Oh my God, some people shouldn't vote." And I'm like, I, am I a hypocrite for saying that? Have I just grown some? Am I becoming an old man? I don't know, but.
Definitely old man. I'm going to definitely say that one, because I also feel like an old man a lot of times. If I had a lawn, I would yell at people to get off of it.
Living in an apartment, you don't have that luxury of yelling at people for being on your lawn.
I mean, I'm kind of by the pool, so I could be like, pipe down, having fun out there in the sun.
Quit having fun. I'm old and doing my podcast.
Exactly. I did have a point, but I have forgotten it now, and I'm just hovering. Damn it.
Well, let's get back to FIFA, because that was my rant and conspiracy liberal corner.
Sure.
Floating segment that is bound to pop up at any time.
Oh yeah, but I hate to do this, but before we get to FIFA, since we're still in conspiracy theory corner,
put your hats back on, ladies and gentlemen.
I have been witness to a conspiracy theory on Facebook linking Anthony Bourdain with both Hillary Clinton and Harvey Weinstein.
I saw the Harvey Weinstein. I think the Hillary Clinton one, I saw the picture. I think that's edited. I don't think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like that. The Hillary Clinton one, basically, it's a tweet from Bourdain 3 days before he passed away saying, I have information on Hillary Clinton.
That's a long-standing meme in the alt-right that just won't die.
Every time somebody dies, it comes back.
Yeah.
And it's especially cruel given that it was a suicide here.
Yeah.
And it plays into that narrative whenever it is a suicide. But anyway, the one with Harvey Weinstein, I had to do some digging into. And
let's real fast, for context, for those who don't know, Anthony Bourdain was a culinary reviewer. He had a bunch of TV shows and books. How would you? He
was a chef who found fame after writing a book called Kitchen Confidential, which gave people insight into the basically the restaurant business and especially the kitchens. He then went on to do TV shows, especially travel-oriented food TV shows. And full disclosure, he was one of my absolute favorite writers. I love travel, and he was somebody who made the other side of the world come alive just by writing a quick short form article about it. And I'm very much going to miss him.
I'm going to tell him myself, I have never seen anything outside of a few clips of his stuff. I've never read anything of his. I knew of him in pop culture from some of his recent activism and vocal, outspokenness in the Me Too movement, in support of the Me Too movement. But outside of that, I didn't know him very well.
I would absolutely recommend, if you're interested in travel at all or food, I would absolutely recommend any of his shows. Pick a destination that you're interested in and watch him go eat and drink and be an asshole to the locals, that's his shtick, and we loved him for it. I lapped it up, loved it. But anyway, so his current girlfriend is an Italian actress whose name I did not write down, but she is one of the Harvey Weinstein accusers. In fact, I think she's one of the ones who's in fact accusing him of sexual assaults, not just coercion or not just, messing with her career. Like, she alleges that he actually assaulted her. And Anthony Bourdain has been an outspoken supporter of her in this. And this is where it gets crazy, is that supposedly, I believe the New Yorker magazine reported that Harvey Weinstein had links to Black Ops Mossad agents that he was using to intimidate and silence witnesses and accusers. So the allegation goes that Harvey Weinstein ordered Israeli Black Ops to kill Anthony Bourdain.
That's awful.
Yeah.
Now, is it Rose McGowan? How do you know who I'm talking about? One of the Me Too people.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. That's somebody else.
I know. She spoke out just recently and said that prior to the suicide, Anthony had reached out to a doctor for help, and that the doctor gave him advice or prescriptions or whatever, and he declined to take it. So I thought that was an interesting thing that recently came out. That it gets back to you can go seek help, but it comes back to you also got to take the advice. You can talk to someone on suicide hotline or talk to someone in your family, but if the doctor prescribes something or they give you advice and you don't act on it, keep going down the hill.
Yeah, I think the takeaway here is, if you feel like you need help, then you shouldn't feel any apprehension, I shouldn't say you shouldn't feel. You should seek help. There are resources available.
But act on the help too. Act on it, you know?
Absolutely. Well, let's go from downer to downer, and let's talk about the World Cup.
My least favorite world sporting event.
Really?
Actually, no, I don't like any of them, so they're all...
I was saying, like, Winter Olympics?
Hey, at least they have that thing where you ski in the flat area for a long period of time and then shoot at targets.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, curling.
Well, the 2018 World Cup starts on Thursday, this coming Thursday.
Is this the one that's in Kumar or whatever?
In Kumar?
What, Qumran? Where's the... So is it K or Q or something?
It will in 2022. In 4 years from now, it will be in Qatar.
Qatar or Qatar? Oh yeah, we talked about this. I remember now.
I don't know. Somebody told me Qatar, and I'm just gonna stick with it.
It just sounds way like you're gonna shiv somebody in a prison. Qatar.
Yeah, you're right. I don't know. Al Jazeera lands, like
Al Jazeera. That seems racial, Jay.
No, that's where Al Jazeera is from.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're from Qatar.
I'm sticking with Qatar. That just sounds more.
Yeah, that's fun.
Less.
I mean, earlier you said hyperbole, so
that was intentional.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, well, now I feel like an ass.
Yeah, it's hyperbole. I know. I'm not a doofus.
Anyway, the World Cup is coming up. It starts on Thursday, and I am psyched. This is something that I look forward to for the 3 years and 11 months that isn't the World Cup.
Now, the World Cup, for the layman American who is, completely oblivious to how the rest of the world sees sports, it's not like the Super Bowl where it's just two teams going at it. It's a structured like playoff thing. Like, what is the World Cup? Give us a rundown.
So the World Cup, in fact, is actually much more than just this tournament that's starting on Thursday. Technically, what's starting on Thursday is the World Cup finals.
Oh.
Meaning that what we're going to see over the next month is 32 of the best teams in the world playing against each other. And over the previous 3 years, the entire world has been trying to qualify and be one of those 32 teams who gets to play in Russia. For this upcoming World Cup.
Why is everything in Russia this year?
Corruption.
Corruption.
The
corruption, Russia, it's a theme we're having.
Oh, absolutely. This World Cup and the next one in Qatar, they were both announced at the same time. They were the bids for where they were going to be hosted were decided at the same time back in 2010. And it was a complete shock because there was a policy of, they called it continental rotation to decide who's going to host the World Cup. Basically, the continents took turns over the past few cycles to spread around who got to host. That kind of created some situations that were not really desirable, such as this last one in Brazil. Brazil was the only bidder. So nobody really wanted it. And FIFA was like, well, this doesn't really work. So they decided to hand out these next two at the same time. Everybody knew that the 2018 edition was probably going to be in Europe, just because when we talk about soccer, the two big markets for it are Europe and South America. People say that it's the world sport, and it kind of is, but it really isn't. Like, it is the most popular one, but it's not as universal as people would have you believe. It's really most popular in South America and Europe. Like in India, they couldn't give a shit about soccer in India. Like, they pay less attention than we do.
But don't they like rugby?
In India, they're mostly cricket.
Cricket, okay.
Yeah, they're real big into cricket. So
baseball.
Say what?
Like British baseball, golf.
Yeah.
That's how I view cricket. I hate sports.
So the 2018 one, we pretty much knew was going to be going to Europe. And then 2022, we really didn't know other than not Europe and not South America, because those had been the last two. So it came down for 2022. It was basically between the US and Qatar. And because I'm that much of a nerd, I actually watched the bid presentations of the United States delegation and the Qatar delegation to the FIFA executive committee making the decision. And the United States bid was just straight up practicality, because it was 2010, middle of the financial crisis. Basically, the whole pitch was, we're going to make a ton of money and it's going to cost very little because you don't have to build anything.
We have all the stadiums and everything.
Exactly. And the infrastructure projects, it goes far beyond just the stadiums, because you need the tourist infrastructure. You know, you need an airport that's going to handle the influx of visitors. You need a way for the people to get from the airport to the town or to the stadium. You need roads, you need bridges, you need a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And the United States bid was, we got it. We can host tomorrow if you want to.
Okay.
Now, the Qatar bid, they might as well have just played an episode of the Jetsons. Like, it was like flying cars, you know, oh, don't worry that it's going to be 110 degrees outside in July when we normally do this. We're going to create basically a massive drone that's going to fly over the stadium and hover over it and just kind of block the sun and move with it as the sun moves along the sky. What? We're also going to air condition each individual seat, but not the stadium as a whole. Like, it's not going to be a dome. It's still going to be open air. We're just going to air condition the, you know, area around each seat, because that's cost effective.
So, okay, why couldn't you just have the drone point its blades at the stadium and just fan the people? Like a big enough drone to do that?
That's a great question.
I mean, I feel like if you're building a giant drone that can block out the sun, just build a giant fan that blows cold air on people.
Well, I guess if it was strong enough to do that, wouldn't that affect like the flight of the ball?
Don't have it in Qatar.
You're absolutely right. Basically, the only credible explanation, or maybe not credible, but the only believable explanation to me for why Qatar was awarded this World Cup was corruption, that they paid off the executive committee. There's no other believable explanation. Occam's razor earlier.
Yeah.
And as for Russia, there's less outright evidence. It's a little less obvious, but given everything else we've seen from Russia, the Sochi Olympics, taking over what's it called? Crimea.
Yeah.
Like, Russia does what it wants. Yeah. And especially back in 2010, back before the oil price crashed, Russia was flush with cash.
Yeah.
So this World Cup could potentially be, I don't mean to say Berlin 1936, but like 10% of that. Like, we're giving Putin a spotlight.
Yeah.
And
that's not good. We should boycott the World Cup, clearly.
Well, okay. Do you remember a few months ago when the Russians tried to kill that ex-spy who was living in England?
Yes. Like,
the evidence is clear. This was perpetrated by the Russians. The Russians, of course, have denied it, but we all know what happened.
The Ukrainian thing where the guy faked his death, that has called, like, Russia has latched onto that to try and undermine claims that they tried to kill the guy in England.
Oh, yeah, definitely. At first, when I saw that story about the journalist faking his death, I thought, genius. You know, wow, what an incredible thing. Because I guess to give some background, Ukrainian, I guess he's not even Ukrainian. He's actually Russian.
He's a Russian, yeah.
He's based in Ukraine now. He's a journalist. He's a big critic of Putin. And he faked his own death in order to try and entrap the people from Russia who had been sent to kill him. And I believe it was successful. However, when we take a step back from it, this plays right into Putin's hands.
Yep. Where
his whole thing is, hey, man, nothing's real. It's all fake news. You can't believe what anybody says. This kind of just plays right into that.
The chess that he is playing is in such a... Like, he's playing Spock's 3D chess, and, like, everybody else is playing checkers.
Yeah. And, well, especially in the White House.
They're not even playing chess. They're playing Chinese chess or something. Chinese checkers. They're like 3 games off.
Yeah, exactly. So, damn it, I was on a roll, and now I lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
You're good.
Well, is there any additional... Okay, we were talking about Ukraine, and you said that the guy was actually... This plays into Putin's hand, that he everything's fake news. That's kind of your last thing I remember.
No, before we got into the Ukrainian thing, but we can move on.
Okay.
So another reason why I wanted to bring this up is that we're back in the same situation we were again in 2010, where on Wednesday, the day before the tournament kicks off, FIFA is going to award the host for the 2026 tournament, the next one that has not been decided yet. And for 2026, we only have 2 bids left, one from Morocco and one from principally the United States. And just from the smell tests, who should be hosting the World Cup? Morocco or the United States along with Mexico and Canada?
United States along with Mexico and Canada, mainly because infrastructure already there. Probably be good for the continent to try and reunify after Trump's dumb-ass tariff moves.
Excellent point. I hadn't even thought of that.
And Morocco is probably also hot as shit.
Excellent points. Exactly. And I don't mean to, I don't mean to disparage Morocco as a country.
Hold on, one last thing. Also, Morocco doesn't have the money that Qatar has, so they don't have the Jetsons presentation opportunity.
Very much true. They don't have the oil wealth.
So continue
on. So I don't really mean to disparage Morocco. Other than, once again, it's the same kind of situation. Morocco's going to have to build 12 stadiums from scratch, essentially. Even the ones that they're going to upgrade, it's basically might as well you knock the whole thing down and build a new one. While the U.S., we have everything in place. We're ready to go. Let's do this thing. We haven't hosted since 1994. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Could part of FIFA's resistance to the United States is because of its overall lack of popularity in the United States?
You know what? I haven't heard that as an explanation, and I think that the reason why it might be is that rather than looking at it as an opponent, it's more, this is a huge market, a huge and wealthy market that is underserved. Look at these hundreds of millions of people with money in their pockets.
I feel like
having the world something else.
I feel like having the World Cup here would probably get more people interested in what is this thing that we don't ever care about.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that happened in 1994 when we hosted the last time. Prior to that, no one cared. Once we had the World Cup here, MLS was founded a few years later because interest spiked. And, some people kept watching, some didn't. And that's just kind of how it goes. But this bidding process has been especially rancorous ever since Trump took office. Imagine that. Basically, out of just general anti-American sentiment in the world in general. The Moroccans actually were using gun violence in America as a selling point for holding it in Morocco, saying, we don't have these shootings, we don't have these problems. Part of the reason why they don't have those problems is that they are a moderately repressed dictatorship.
I was going to say, do they even have urban areas to have shootings?
Oh, yeah, they do. Absolutely. There's, Casablanca, Rabat, Marrakesh.
Those are old movies, and that's a great song by Crosby, Stills and Nash. But
they absolutely have densely packed urban areas.
I know. My buddy Winston just went there. I'm just kidding, but it's very much like you see in Casablanca or like in the old world. They don't have the modern infrastructure. I doubt that they have the airport ready for that level of people coming to their country. I mean, it's probably going to be people going to France and taking a boat across.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's what a lot of people really. I'd say the majority of tourists to Morocco, what they do is they're really going to Spain and they do a day trip or a weekend trip. They take the ferry across.
That would be, in my opinion, an argument in favor of having a Morocco. Morocco be like, hey, look, yes, you got to build the infrastructure here, but that benefits us because we can then have more games here, blah, blah, blah. But we're also closer to Europe, bigger market that people will want to come across to our country, spend money here, invest, blah, blah, blah. Whereas over in the United States, if you're doing it in the United States, Canada, and Mexico, there's 30 games, you're dividing it between 3 countries, 10 games a country. You can't get from Mexico to Canada in a day or two, but you could get from Spain to Morocco in a day, right?
No, you're absolutely right. That is one of the arguments against the United States as a host, is that we are so spread out that the travel time takes a toll both on the teams and on the fans. But my response to that is, who cares? Brazil's just as big, and they hosted in 2014. The next European tournament in 2020 it's not being hosted by any individual country.
It's all of Europe.
It's going to be spread out in, Paris, Berlin, London, Madrid, all the major cities.
Valid point. I'm playing a little devil's advocate.
No, absolutely. No, I don't mean to shout you down. I guess I'm just responding.
Dude, if anyone shouted anyone down in this podcast, it was me with you on the executive branch. So you have nothing to apologize for.
Fair enough.
Like, I think I was like an inch away from my microphone during that segment.
But another way that Trump has tried to meddle in this process and just failed is that at one point he was trying to chastise South Africa and trying to say, well, hey, you're our ally. I really hope that you're going to vote for us. Well, that's not how this works. The voting process for selecting the host, they've actually changed it to try and avoid corruption. Where now every individual country, and I think there's something like 211 of them within FIFA, each individual one gets one vote, and that's how they decide who the host is going to be. But the countries, they basically all vote in blocks based on continent, where their own, basically they're FIFA, but just for their own continent. They call them confederations,
kind of like the IOC, like in America.
Basically all the North American countries get together and decide who they're going to vote on, and they all vote together. Well, South Africa is on the same continent as
Morocco. Yeah, I get you.
They're not going to vote for us, dumbass. Like I wouldn't even expect them to.
Yeah.
If Mexico were bidding, I would expect the United States to support Mexico.
Look, Trump isn't savvy enough to understand domestic or international politics. What makes you think he's savvy enough to understand FIFA and all of its levels of corruption?
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. And the FIFA has taken some steps to try and solve the problems, try and combat the corruption. They got rid of the president, Sepp Blatter, but his replacement is no better. I read an article this week where he hired a new, I think he was like the vice president of like internal government affairs, basically an internal auditor. It was going to be his job to make sure that there was no more corruption. And when he refused to change the rules, the fundamental rules regarding who could be appointed to the board, because the new president wanted to appoint a Russian who had been implicated in all those Russian doping scandals.
Oh.
He wanted to appoint him to the board of FIFA, and the new auditor basically refused, so he fired him.
That's not good.
You're talking about we're talking about Russians having their fingers and everything. It's here. This is it here. They were so afraid of pissing off Russia that they've just been complicit in their corruption.
See, we may have looked like we were in control of the global system, but honestly, I feel like Russia spent the last 15 years just infiltrating the underbelly of the global market, the global system, and it's just we are now at the point where everything is manifesting, everything is like blooming, if you will, all of their labors, and it's like we're reacting. They've been doing this for 10 years. We're just now realizing they've even started doing anything.
It's like we just now have a leadership dumb enough to fall for it.
Yeah, like it was like Operation Dumbass Eagle, like is a go.
Oh, I don't like it. I don't like it at all. But one last little fun story, or maybe not so fun story from the World Cup. This actually came out just a few hours ago. Nike has announced that they will no longer provide footwear for the Iranian soccer team that's going to be participating in the World Cup. World Cup starts on Thursday. This is 3 days from now, and they're, Nike, the shoe supplier, is backing out because of the sanctions from pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal.
Yeah.
But curveball here, back in 2014, when the sanctions were still in place before the deal, Nike provided them with their footwear back then, and nothing happened. Nobody cared. Now they do, apparently.
Well, I feel like that, again, the administration is going to selectively enforce these laws. So, gosh, the Iran deal. Don't even get me started. We can't get back into that. I could go for hours. All right, so that's the end of South America corruption with Jay. Although it did go across multiple continents, to be fair. But let's dig into some weird news, and this is kind of like a weird old news a little bit, just because we had the segment on AI. But this last week, MIT announced that they had created a psychopathic artificial intelligence, and the world responded, "But why?" And they said, "Well, because we need to know how to understand a bad AI if one appears. So why not create one in a controlled environment?" And I say, okay, that's a little more reasonable. And now this AI is not like controlling machines or making killer robots or anything. Essentially, they created a AI algorithm and they fed it terrible, terrible things off the internet over and over and over again, and basically allowed it to surf the worst pages in Reddit and read all of the articles and stuff like that. They then proceeded to show it an ink block test. Now, the way they tested the AI's response was they had a second AI, a control AI, that was essentially educated using a normal, quote unquote, whatever that means, data set. I just like to think of it as a bunch of Bob Ross paintings and videos of Bob Ross painting stuff. That's normal, right?
Happy little cloud.
At least that's what I've seen all the AIs watching up to this point. But they showed the inkblot tests to the two AI, and the responses were drastically different. The psychotic AI, which they have dubbed Norman, it's a great psychotic name for an AI, responded to things like, "Oh, picture of two men stabbing each other," whereas the normal AI is picture of a family having a picnic. So ultimately, they said that from this study, what we have learned is that it's not the algorithm that's bad. It's not the AI that's bad. It's the data. What you feed into the AI is what you're going to get out of the AI.
Garbage in, garbage out.
The old axiom, garbage in, garbage out. Exactly. So, don't feed your AI junk and violence. That's the ultimate lesson. But I thought that was pretty weird.
Yeah, there's not a lot of stories that you hear about, Stanford AI helps old lady cross the road.
Are you saying that these AI are already like apathetic to us?
Oh, yeah, they're going to kill us all.
Well, I think that Elon Musk has talked about this. He brings up a good point. We can't be reactive. We do have to be proactive and maybe have guidelines for how we're going to enter the AI arena and not just let the wild west of capitalism just, try and make as much money as possible off of it.
Yeah, well, that's not happening anytime soon.
Well, that's true. That's true. But I mean, it's still good advice. One of the great dissenters of our time.
Elon Musk?
I think so. I mean, he's not the how many people do you know that's talking negatively about AI? Like most people,
like a lot.
Really, I feel like it's a minority. Most people are like, yeah, let's do this, especially in the science community.
Well, that's true. There's obvious benefit to it.
Yeah, there's obvious benefit to it, especially in quantum physics and calculations. Oh, and side note, we also, once again, are the country with the most powerful and fastest supercomputer. Yeah. So that'll be probably like another 3 months of dominance before the Chinese put out the next one.
Yeah, well, we tried.
Is it like Adele? Like, not Adele, but like buying Adele? Like you have it for 3 months and it's obsolete already? Is that how supercomputers work too? Is it the same kind of like trajectory?
It wouldn't surprise me.
All right. Well, so let's move on to what I want to talk about this week, and that would be the Supremes, which is an endearing term for the Supreme Court of the United States. And they had two, I think, important decisions that came out this week that have been discussed quite a bit. And I'd like to kind of go over those two. And the first one is the infamous gay wedding cake case from Colorado. The Supreme Court handed down its ruling, and they ruled in favor of the Colorado baker who refused to bake a cake to celebrate the marriage of a same-sex couple because of a religious objection. Now, the ruling was 7-2. Now, whenever I first saw this, like the headlines that they had sided with the baker, I was surprised. I was like, really? I was not expecting you to go this direction. And I think a lot of people probably had that initial reaction. And they probably assumed the worst. If you didn't side with the civil liberties question, then it's got to be pretty bad. You know, are they going to allow cake bakers to just discriminate against anybody now? And so then I started reading into the opinion. Actually, honestly, at the end of the day, I feel like I agree with their decision. Now, Jay, how much do you know about this case?
Just the basics, basically, that it was really just procedural, that it wasn't a ruling on the issues.
So, yeah, essentially what happened was there was a gay couple in Colorado who went to the baker. They wanted to get a cake. He declined to make the cake based off his religious views. They filed a complaint with the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. Okay, they are in charge of enforcing the civil rights laws of the state of Colorado. They have a law that says it is illegal to discriminate against someone based off their sexual orientation. They filed essentially and did an investigation, and they fined the baker for refusing to make the cake. And in their investigation, they stated that he was just using his religion as an excuse to discriminate against the same-sex couple. This goes up on appeal to the appellate court, and it ultimately gets to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court's ruling ultimately was that the members of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission had showed animus, which is, malice, towards the defendant, Mr. Phillips, the baker, specifically when they suggested that his claim of religious freedom were just made to justify his discrimination. Essentially, the majority says that when you are enforcing civil rights laws, you don't get to be motivated by their religion. You don't get to have any negative motivation with regards to someone's religion. The government has to operate neutral when it comes to people's faith. Okay? Specifically, the majority said, at the same time, the religious and philosophical objections to gay marriage are protected speech or protected views, and in some instances, protected forms of expression. Kennedy wrote that the neutral consideration to which Phillips was entitled was compromised here. So essentially, yes, they did decide on procedural grounds. They said that you, Civil Rights Commission, you blundered by being motivated by religion, so we can't get to the ultimate question here on the case. And so they kicked it out. He doesn't have to pay the fine. A lot of people excited, a lot of people disappointed. Specifically, a priest in the area where the baker is from stated that he was curious as to why the court didn't give further guidance on how to proceed from here. So the dissent was really interesting. I think Ginsburg wrote the dissent, and she said that, when a couple contacts a baker for a wedding cake, the product they are seeking is a cake celebrating their wedding, not a cake celebrating heterosexual weddings or same-sex weddings, and that is a service that the couple were denied. So they took a different view. But ultimately, 7-2, that's a pretty strong opinion, limited to these facts, meaning that unless your facts are identical to this case, this probably is not going to be a great precedent setter. Mm-hmm. But I think it's an important case. I think it's important also because it reminds us that when the Supreme Court rules on something, every inch has to be right with regards to procedure. They're not going to answer the ultimate question unless every dot is dotted, every I is dotted, and every T is crossed. It's got to be ripe for determination. So a little civics lesson, if we will. But the other really important decision, is there any thoughts on that, Jay?
Not really. I think I agree with you that on these facts that the Colorado Commission really was acting improperly. They were going about it the wrong way. My feelings on the ultimate issue are quite conflicted. But I think I agree with you that this was the right decision on these facts.
I think it's the right decision on these facts. I think that it's frustrating for people who want an answer now. That now have to make it a new case. Will have to make its way up all the way to the court again.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes
the perfect case.
In the perfect case, has to make it. But sometimes that's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way of the road, if you will.
The way she goes.
The way she goes. Let's see here. The other case that I thought was important was the court's ruling on the purge of voters from the voter registration in the state of Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, the court ruled 5-4 that Ohio's method of removing names from its voters' rolls does not violate any federal law. Okay, that was what the ruling was.
Can you explain what they were doing?
Yes, that's where I was going. So, no, you're fine. So essentially, this is what happened was Ohio passes a law that basically says every 2 years you're going to get in the mail a thing saying, hey, you didn't vote, or I think it's every 2 years if you don't vote in an election, they'll send you a thing saying you didn't vote in the election. If you don't respond to this letter or go online and respond to this via the internet, then we are going to remove you from the voter registration rolls, despite the fact that you're a validly registered voter and haven't moved or anything like that. Just you didn't vote in one of the elections, and so you have to re-verify that you are wanting to vote in the next election, essentially after a 2-year period. And so watch groups intervened, sued, saying that it violated federal law, specifically the National Voter Registration Act, which is referred to as the Motor Law. And it was a law that was passed by Congress to eliminate voter purging, essentially. Okay? Now, let's see here. The Ohio law allowed the states to send address confirmation notices to the voters who have not engaged in voter activity for 2 years. If the voter doesn't returns the notice through the mail or responds online, then their information is updated. If the notice is ignored, then the voter's registration is purged from the rolls. So that's the question. Does that violate the motor law? Which the watch groups argued that it did. Now the majority said that. Essentially, the federal government has no authority to second guess Congress or decide whether Ohio's supplemental process is the ideal method for keeping its voting rolls up to date. The only question before us is whether it violates federal law. And they said, no, it doesn't. The minority went off on this. A dissent from Sotomayor and the liberal justices argue that the court ignored the history of voter suppression and the National Voter Registration Act, commonly referred to as the Motor Law. Congress enacted the NVRA against the backdrop of a substantial effort by states to disenfranchise low-income and minority voters, including programs that purge eligible voters from registration lists because they failed to vote in a prior election. The court errs in ignoring this history and distorting the statutory text, ultimately sanctioning the very purging that Congress expressly sought to protect against. So essentially, the minority is saying that the motor law was designed to prevent what is happening in Ohio, and the court is essentially reading around the statutory intent in order to uphold the Ohio system of purging the rolls.
Right. I'll admit I haven't read the opinion itself. I've only read reports about it. But basically what I read was the majority is saying that the statute prohibiting states from purging the rolls of non-voters only applies to that. If you have another explanation for why you're purging these rolls other than people just weren't voting, well, then it's okay. And the reason accepted by the court here from Ohio was
of the address change.
The address change. They're saying, oh, we're just checking to make sure that people haven't moved. You know what, majority? That's BS.
See, that's the thing.
BS.
See, this is the thing, and this is maybe what I was failing to say very clearly, is it's bullshit. They're finding ways to read around the intent. And this is something I feel like the Supreme Court taught the states how to do. You know, back whenever, and I'm kind of sidetracking for a second, but back whenever they whenever they ruled that you can't have state-led prayer in schools, what did Alabama do? They passed the moment of silence. But in the legislative history, they said, we're doing this because we want prayer in school, and this is just a way to get it back in school because of the Supreme Court decision. Well, that goes up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says, we read in your legislative history that this is what you were doing. So that clearly means your law was intended to undermine our decision. So that's unconstitutional. Can't do that.
You idiots put this on paper.
You idiots put this on paper. So now that taught all the states, we can still discriminate, just find a valid reason for it. We can still, do things that we're not supposed to, just find a valid reason for it. So it's like the, restricting abortions to facilities that for doctors that have privileges, that kills all the abortion clinics because most of them don't have privileges, nor are they necessary for the procedures. It's for women's health, finding a valid reason. This is the new conservative way of attacking ideologies or things that they don't like, is they come up with a valid reason and then they go ahead and do the thing that they were going to do anyways.
Yeah, they find a way to take the moral high ground.
Yeah. We're just trying to keep our voter rolls. It's the internet, bud. It's the digital age. It ain't paper files. This is not hard to keep track of.
Yeah. And I'll admit, I used to be one of those people who thought that voter ID laws were great because I thought, why would we possibly leave our system open to exploitation by people who are going to be voting without IDs? But once you really start to think about that, that doesn't make any sense. We need to be creating a system that encourages people to vote. And this kind of law is doing the opposite. And for the Supreme Court to back it, I think is reprehensible.
I think it's reprehensible for them to know that the intent of Congress was to prevent voter purging, and they essentially sanctioned voter purging because the state gave a reason that they should be able to do it.
Yeah.
What was the point to stop voter purging or not? What's the spirit of the law here? Mm-hmm. They've ignored the spirit of the statute.
Absolutely.
So
we're losing track of the things that really matter, like making sure that people feel connected to their community and connected to the political process, and just removing them from the voter rolls for no good reason. And especially because it's so quick. You have to vote in every federal election or you're out.
Yeah. Well, and also, let's see here. You don't give people a holiday for the election, so they have to make sure that they get off in order to vote.
Stuff.
That's some shit. You don't make it easy to vote. You put it in places that are difficult for people to get to, or they're in schools during the school day where there's people there. There's no parking. That they have done things. And by they, I'm saying specifically the GOP and conservative America, have done things to make it harder for people to vote. And it's under the theory that if you make it harder for poor, low-income minorities to vote, it's more likely for you to maintain your majority power. That is not the way this is supposed to work. It's supposed to be the best ideas win, the best representation wins, the people voice wins, not we can prevent the people from voting enough to where we keep power. That's not a true democracy. That's not a true republic. That is a perversion.
Democracy democracy is not the officials selecting their voters. It's the voters selecting their officials. This is backwards.
This is backwards. And I can't stand it. I don't. If the Democrats are doing it, you're wrong. If the Republicans are doing it, you're wrong. I would rather lose legitimately in a issues-based race because the Democrats were not able to either articulate or didn't have the best ideas than to lose because you have cut my chance of getting voters out of your district by diluting them and creating these crazy fucking gerrymandered districts. I mean, come on. Are you that terrified that your ideas are that shit that you can't let the people actually vote on it? That you have to choose your voters? It just boggles my mind that anyone would think this is okay.
Absolutely. Would you like to hear a crazy left-leaning gerrymandering idea?
Sure. Also, just a side note, the California primaries seemed to go off and the liberal world did not set fire to itself and burn it to the ground.
Yeah, look at that. So this actually comes from Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, which I believe he picked from a law review article from like 2004. Basically, it points out that in the agreement that admitted Texas to the Union back 150 years ago, Texas has the unilateral ability to divide itself into 5 different states. We don't need anybody else's permission to do it because Congress already gave us the permission. So we can, if our legislature gets together and says, hey, we're going to divide up into 5 states, we can do it. And that's actually, by the text of the Constitution, 100% allowed because Congress allowed it and it's our legislature deciding it. So what people are saying is that, so let's say hypothetically that we do this, that we carve up Texas into 5 different states. Basically, Dallas is a state, Houston's a state, the border area with a capital at San Antonio is a state, Austin's a state, and then West Texas with like no real big cities is another state.
El Paso, the capital.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm not sure if you'd put El Paso in the border state or the West Texas state, but basically what they're saying is that right now, probably all of them, except for maybe Austin and the border, are going to be red, pretty solidly red. And West Texas, no matter what, is going to be red.
Yeah.
But in the future, Dallas, Houston, Austin, the border are all going to be blue.
Dallas is already blue. Houston's already blue. The Valley's already blue.
Yeah. So if you look at the Senate, that's going to be, right now we've got 2 Republican senators. We could have 6 Democrats.
Blue ones, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
the Republican state legislature is not going to give that up. You're going to have to create a party called the Divide Texas Party and just like make that the only issue.
Yeah, that's never going to happen.
No.
It's just it was an interesting thought.
It's an interesting thought. It's an interesting that's an interesting thing because California, that rich guy's tried 3 times to divide California up into multiple states, and it has failed every time. He's not trying Texas. I wonder why. He must be conservative.
Yeah, probably.
Well, I think that's the end of my couple of topics on the Supreme Court. I think that there was a Supreme Court case that we started to talk about a few weeks ago, and then you wanted to talk about later. Which one was that?
That was the Union's case.
The Union.
Yeah, I want to come back to that.
Well, we definitely should. I think maybe we should have like a
Union Day.
Well, not necessarily that. I was gonna say maybe in the future, whenever the Supreme Court releases its cases, we could have like a go over the Supreme Court session day.
Yeah,
that might be cool. Maybe save them all for the end when the session closes, and just say this is everything they decided this year.
Yeah, we could we could do like reviews, give them star ratings.
Yeah, well, it's like this opinion, 1 star, boo.
You could have done better, Alito. You could have done better.
That's a terrible diction.
All right. Well, do you want to check the mailbag before we get out of here?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. We've got one more question this week. This comes from Jack in Toledo. He says, "Hi, guys. First time, long time. I've been enjoying the pod while I work on destroying my nemesis."
Where's Toledo? That's in Nevada?
Ohio.
What's out in Toledo? Or what's in Nevada that I'm thinking of?
Reno?
Reno? No, there's a lake out in Nevada and California.
Tahoe?
Tahoe. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, that's something else.
Something different. All right, we're good.
So Jack asks, who are your favorite political commentators / columnists, etc.?
Oh. Well, I think that probably one of my favorites. That's a hard question. I'm going to go with Keith Olbermann, number 1.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Former SportsCenter anchor.
Former SportsCenter. But when he had the countdown with Keith Olbermann back on MSNBC, my family religiously watched it. And he had a segment that was like the worst person in the world. And this is, into the Bush era, just Bush bashing. But my family loved him. And I feel like his ability to punctuate a point with his emphasis is unrivaled almost in commentating. I've never seen someone give a impassioned speech in such cool and calm and collected manner as Keith Olbermann. Look at Hannity. He's a buffoon. He's a buffoon, you know? if Oberman could give the exact same speech and it would be classy.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's absolutely biased. He's absolutely a super liberal, but man, he can deliver a tongue lashing, and you're like, that was impressive.
You know, I can't say who I was expecting to hear from you, but it was not Keith Olbermann. that was a surprise.
Well, good. I'm glad it. I'm keeping you on your toes.
There we go.
What about you?
For me, that's a difficult question to answer. I don't know if this really counts, but I'm a big fan of John Oliver. You know, he's a comedian first, but I very much enjoy that he doesn't talk down to you. You know, he doesn't dumb things down. He talks about important issues, and sometimes they get complicated, and he, in his funny way, tries to explain it and explain why it matters to you. And that's, I don't know if you could tell, but that's something I've been trying to bring to this podcast as well.
Oh, it's good. It's good.
I also, you know, maybe this is outing myself as a secret part of the deep state elite, but I'm a big fan of the Economist, the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the hallmarks of the Economist is that none of the articles are ever signed. You never know who wrote them. It's all like a collective effort. This comes from your correspondent. This comes from the Economist. And I'm also just a big fan of the Economist in general. I very much enjoy the way that they are facts and reason based.
Yeah, that's valid. I think that I would also throw, just because you threw John Oliver in there, I'd also say Colbert. I think that Colbert's commentary just on our society, on what's happening, is always insightful. He brings a very unique perspective of both satire and realism at the same time.
Absolutely. You know, that's a great point. And Colbert is a fascinating figure.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually another Malcolm Gladwell podcast that touches on this, that there are Colbert jokes, especially from his old show, not necessarily from his newer one where he's a little bit more straightforward, but from the Colbert Report, there were so many of his jokes within that show that if you show it to a liberal, they'll say, haha, that is such a good skewering of conservatives. And you show it to conservative and they say the opposite. They think it's skewering liberals. And just the way that he's able to play both sides, make fun of both sides, I think is really unparalleled.
Yeah, no, he definitely, I think, busted out of Jon Stewart's shadow and kind of made it his own.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad that he's still going. He's fantastic, just generally overall.
Yeah, I really haven't watched the Late Show since he took over. I used to be a huge Letterman fan, but then I don't know, I just stopped.
I would encourage you to check it out, because especially his monologues, his interviews. Watch his interview with Bill Clinton. He calls out Bill Clinton for a recent failure of leadership.
Oh, very nice.
But just straight up, he gives him opportunity to do it over. He says, "You need to do this better."
Wow.
That was embarrassing.
You know what? That is an excellent contrast to Jimmy Fallon over there, who's just like, let's do a lip sync battle.
Yeah, no, I agree. Jimmy Fallon is like there's some funny stuff. He's got some funny stuff. He's a funny guy, but it feels a little less. It's a little more immature. The content, you know, the overall feeling, it just feels a little more childish. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just popcorn entertainment. And you know what? If that's what you're looking for, that's exactly, you know, there you go. Go for it. Not for me.
Agreed. Well, very good. There's our viewer question. Hopefully, Mr. What was his name? Our viewer question. Who was it from?
Oh, that's from Jack in Toledo.
Jack in Toledo. When you said jackass, it really sounded like you said jackass.
Not this time.
Not this time. But hopefully that answered your question, Jack. And hopefully it was you were as shocked by my answer as Jay was.
Yeah, I'm sure he is. Well, actually, we need to do the social media call out.
Oh, okay.
So in order to send us these wonderful questions, you can do it in a number of ways. You can email us. We've got a Gmail. We can be found at arbitrarycapriciouspodcast@gmail.com. You can also tweet at us. We have got a Twitter at arbcappodcast. You can also talk about us using the hashtag ArbCapPod. You can find me individually at jsuespante, and you can find Aaron elsewhere on the internet.
Well, I will say this: make sure that you follow, like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and go back and listen to all of our older videos. I think that we have a playlist now on Arbitrary and Capricious podcast YouTube channel, so you can go back and listen to all the old episodes. And as we will continue to create new episodes, new videos, we'll probably go back and look at questions if you leave comments, and try and answer those as we go.
Yeah, I think if you subscribe, it'll actually notify you when we start the podcast, and if you wish, you'd be able to listen in live.
Very cool.
All right. Well, I look forward to talking some more current events with you next week, Aaron. Any closing thoughts?
Just we all need to do better being, nice to each other. I feel like there's a lot of darkness in the world, and we talk about it a lot. Perhaps we need a little segment where we talk about a good story each week. Just so that we're not part of the trope that the news only talks about bad stuff. But
you know what? That's a great idea.
But it just seems like recently things haven't been great. But again, if you're listening to the podcast, like and subscribe, and hopefully we can all together make the world a little bit better.
Yeah, well, the night is dark and full of terrors, but if we're kind to each other, we can make it a little bit better.
That's good. That's good. Where'd you get that from?
Well, the first half came from Game of Thrones, and then I just kind of vamped after that.
Okay. It's like a quasi poem.
Yeah, isn't that like the Red Witch? What's her name? The Scarlet Lady?
Melisandre?
Yeah, doesn't she say the night is dark and full of terrors?
Oh man, I don't remember. There's just a lot of slow, boring dialogue in that show.
That's definitely true. Well,
I love it. It's a great show, but a lot of slow, boring dialogue.
Yeah, April 2019, we're going to convert to a Game of Thrones cast.
Yeah, we'll have a short segue. Also, did you hear they come out with a Game of Thrones prequel? That was greenlit this week.
I saw the headline. I mean, do you have any hope for that?
I think that it'd be interesting to see how Westeros and all that was founded. It's kind of like a alternate history version of the founding of America. Because I know that the old world, they came over to Westeros. That's the whole point, is it's west of the old original continent. I don't know enough about the lore to actually answer these questions, but that's my understanding, is that it's going to get into that and the founding of the North and the creation of the White Walkers.
Yeah, I've got to say that the Game of Thrones, in my opinion, does an exceedingly poor job. I'm talking about the show. The show does an exceedingly poor job in fleshing out the backstory, where in order to understand what was going on, I had to read the Game of Thrones Wikipedia to understand who was who before this.
Well, I feel like for the first 3 seasons, everything was so spoon-fed to us in the show that when they deviated from the book storyline, it kind of was like, we'll take a little bit of this and that and this, and this character's important in some things, and everyone's just kind of like, oh, okay, this, what, who, what, well, okay. It wasn't as nicely laid out and spoon-fed to us after season 3.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just lose my thought.
Oh well, we'll see how that goes. I have faith in HBO.
You have the faith in the HBOs?
I do.
This week I made a statement that we are living in the second golden age of television, and that HBO deserves the credit for ushering in this era, for showing us that TV can be as good, if not better, than the movies.
It all started with The Sopranos.
Got to give credit where credit is due. And Larry Sanders Show. Let's not forget that. Groundbreaker.
Sure, but I didn't know that the Larry Sanders Show existed until 5 years ago, but I was aware of The Sopranos when it was on.
That's true, but Gary Shandling is amazing.
Oh, he is amazing. I'm just talking about cultural effects.
I agree. Sopranos is the cultural impact. I agree.
Also got to give some credit to FX. They're putting out some fantastic shows.
Well, that's what I was saying. FX, AMC, Showtime, all these channels have followed suit and have put out amazing offers. But I don't think that we would be here without The Sopranos, without HBO. Yeah.
Absolutely. HBO was the trailblazer that allowed those others to proliferate.
Absolutely. So hats off and salutes to you, HBO. You are truly our home box office.
And hopefully our future sponsor.
We are sucking up hard.
All right. Well, that's everything for me today on this June 11th of 2018. So
Episode
everybody out there,
13 completed.
there we go. Have an arbitrary and capricious week out there, everybody.
Signing off.